Greetings, my friends. It is Uncle Mike and Christi. What?
I feel like I'm sitting next to a totally strange person when you say Uncle Mike.
Because you don't know me as
I
Uncle
don't know
Mike.
Uncle Mike.
Well, what's ironic is because I really am an Uncle Mike, right? Like I'm an uncle to
That's
people.
true. It's true.
And I started calling myself Uncle Mike because of Asa.
Ah.
Asa started calling me Uncle Mike.
He just started calling you Uncle Mike.
And I just thought it was funny.
And you are an uncle.
And this is what's true. People who know me in real life, they can't stand Uncle Mike. Like that's a continuous thing I've heard from people who are friends with me. Like, God, just stop with the Uncle Mike stuff. It makes my skin crawl.
Okay.
But then the people who know me through this, and we haven't had like a on ground.
What's the Uncle Mike stuff that makes their skin crawl?
Well, they don't see me as Uncle Mike. They see me as a regular human being. Like Uncle Mike's the kind of like there's like it's like a song and a dance.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like that far from who and what I am, right?
Right.
But like like when we start recording it, like it changes a little bit. Like they groomed me to be a performer, right? And I can't help it. So, all right, how about this? We'll start over. Greetings, friends. Like, what do I call myself?
This is Michael.
It's hard for me to say it. This is Michael.
Well, just wait until we get to our collapsing false identities.
Whew.
Then we'll play with this for a half an hour.
Oh, without a doubt. All right,
Okay.
all right. So this is Christi.
What if I started? How would I start?
How would you?
Welcome, friends.
It's strange.
Kind of strange.
It's strange. All right.
All right. Well, when I get to that, when I get there, then I'll have the grounding for which to coach you through a meta paradigm shift of collapsing false identity
All right.
in your content.
In the content.
Yeah.
Well, because you know.
But I have to do the work first.
My way of being, and I think this ties into what we're talking about. Like my natural way is I'm so fluid to my environment. Like there's a continuity of what I bring to every environment, but then I also change outer forms. Like I'm really good with a lot of different environments.
Are you saying you're a shapeshifter?
I mean, if you want to use that phrase.
Right.
And so like you're absolutely right. Like I don't think I identify with that outer shape. Like I don't identify with Uncle Mike. I don't identify with Mike. I don't identify with Michael. And all of those. But there's a thing. So that really does tie into this idea of false identities, because and then the ability to play with them, to try on costumes and take them off. But that's just a teaser because we're not going to be talking about false identities yet, because that's part of this. Because what are we talking about?
We're evolving through the meta paradigm shift.
Or the definition of what that is.
Playing with the definition, playing with the manifestation, the demonstration of a meta paradigm shift.
Which includes collapsing
false timelines.
False narratives, false identities.
False identities.
Well, I think it's all the same thing. It's like
we're discovering as we go what we can all collapse.
Because what collapses is what is not real, what is false. Like
a facade
so
falls down.
That's one of the reasons natural astrology, to me, is a tool for this, because we're going back to what is not collapsible.
Enduring truth is what you wrote in the book.
Enduring truth. It's like, well, this doesn't collapse. Like, whether we call that the sun, whether we call that Forrest, whether we call it, however you define that narrative. Like, yes, we use narratives.
We can collapse the narrative, the identity, the timeline, but you can't collapse
there's certain things that don't.
The actual thing that you see in the sky.
You can't collapse this physical body.
You can't collapse your physical body.
You can't, I mean, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, well, that would be death.
That would be death. But we're not crossing that line.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about. So we're going to do some housekeeping, because we made two really, in my opinion, really good videos.
Yep.
Like I've really enjoyed this process of moving away from me having a one-on-one relationship with the camera to like having this dynamic which you and I share.
Yeah.
And it makes me, as the dude who's talked to the camera for a few years, like this feels much more.
Oh, we're already collapsing false identities.
Exactly. And so we've made two videos. We've recorded two videos, which has it been 2 or 3?
We recorded something with people, and and we lost connection with like there was like 5 to 7 people.
Mm-hmm.
We lost connection first,
Mm-hmm.
and then we lost the recording.
Mm-hmm.
But we lost the audio recording, but we had the video recording.
Right.
Don't know how or why that happened.
Right.
In the meantime, we've also done 2 recordings on Telegram,
Mhm.
very successfully. Telegram is super user-friendly.
Okay.
This is not an ad for Telegram. This is just us doing this work and realizing that like there is no post-production work in
Mhm.
Telegram.
Mhm.
You just and it's up, it's
Mhm.
there. So we've done 2 videos on Telegram, like short kind of touch points, and then we did a video before we left on our journey south
Mhm.
at like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Like literally
the night before we left.
Like, and it was, in my opinion, it was some of the best, most authentic, most real sort of thing which I've ever put out on like the computer box. Like, because there's a freezing that happens to me if I'm just interacting with that. Like I need to kind of work through that because that doesn't feel real, like seeing a human being across from me. And we've done that 3 times, and it's created this really good content, and it has not been shared.
3 times?
No, 2 times.
2 times. But anyway, this last time that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
it was like a totally different. It was like, what do you say, it was like 95% when you were checking the upload.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were traveling and uploading, and I think that's probably where our shortcoming was trying to like upload while moving with our wireless connection.
Right.
And so we got to like 95%, and then YouTube was like, error, sorry.
Yeah.
And so we're playing with technology in ways that we hadn't before, because we've never. You usually do hard drive recording, post-production, uploading. It's a lot of work. And we were trying to like cut through some of that. But I think, I don't know what the lesson is here, but there's something important about the process that we don't want to rely on necessarily like YouTube or Google or like all of the platforms that we're pretty like skeptical about to be doing that work for us. I think that's the lesson I've internalized from it. It's like, can't shortcut the system, because shortcutting the system would be relying on the system. And this whole meta paradigm shift show, kind of like, I keep seeing this as like, we've entered into this like meta paradigm shift series. And like season 1 is this collapsing false timelines. Season 2 is going to be like collapsing false identities, and we're just like evolving this as we go, demonstrating what it looks like and feels like in our lives, while also providing like course material. So just continuing with the housekeeping. Did you want to say anything more about all these videos we've done that haven't uploaded or worked out?
So yeah, well, all I was saying was we've started something, which in my mind, because I'm always on the front end of experience, so I tend to forget what happened the day before.
That's so true.
And so I'm going to be talking as if like all of that stuff has already been absorbed.
As if they've seen.
And I'm just pointing out like the truth of the matter is like that has not shared,
That's so true.
that stuff has not occurred.
Right.
And so, but in my mind it has. So that's a little bit of the housekeeping. And then the second thing, I want to comment what you said about with the technology. My approach is like, and we talked about this before we hit record, is find, to me, right now, and this is for me uniquely, and then I think really for all of us, is like, how do we find ourselves in this world and not of it? And what that means is, like, in this world, like, I got to use technology. I talk about technology is like, this, if we don't get off technology, like, there's a very, very clear end point. Like, and you're just going to keep getting breadcrumbed. And I would both be hypocritical and unintegrated if I'm like, I talk this way, and I'm like, Google, and blah, blah, blah. So I read
YouTube Cloud.
all of that. And what's ironic, I used to work in the industry that built the cloud, like all of that, like that's inside my.
There's so much rich stuff for false collapsing of identity.
Particularly after you saw these pictures, because we're our parents. But this idea of how to be able to share the information which we're sharing through the medium which we're trying to collapse. And so that's a really, really, like, it could be. And I think me personally, I've really struggled with it in the past because I looked at it very confrontational. It's like, I can't be friends with this. I can't be friends with this system, that system, because I know their nature. And this is where I want to go with all of this. And what I know that I'm recognizing, where I'm feeling like a shifting happening, at least with my interaction here, is through the introduction of the dynamic of you in here. Okay. It's like I don't quite have as much of this, like,
you don't have a charge,
or like I need to destroy it, or like I'm in conflict with it, or I'm not being authentic with it, or all these things. And so this is where I wanna like circle this back to, and we'll see where this goes, is a story weighing with Pierce.
Ooh, so I have to hop in here and finish housekeeping.
Okay.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
You never make it easy.
I don't. I really don't.
So, I referenced the book. I don't know if anyone picked up on that. Michael and I just finished writing and editing, designing really, a book. It's right here. The book, the title is How to Collapse False Timelines to Make Space for Meta Paradigm Shift. And or, if you're more like academic or whatever, it would be more like a natural astrology primer and foundation for Starboard practice. But if you're tuned into this material, you know that the underlying spirit and ceremony of this is actually shifting. You're actually energetically shifting, rewilding consciousness, participating in a meta paradigm shift movement, if you will. And it's just kind of like a grounding of this like first season. Like you were doing you did the Bechtelsville video, you did the I forget what the other one was. You've done a couple episodes of like collapsing false timelines.
Practically time travel.
Practically time travel, right? You've been playing with this, like just playing with timelines first, and now it's like how we just collapse the falsity.
Right. And you bring this because I just keep on talking about all my stories.
And
all
so so Telegram is a way to ground, bring people together. Someone was really sweet and said thanks for pitching a tent over our ragtag team or something like that. Like giving some containment so that the energy that you bring, I mean honestly, like as a witness to your life, the material you channel, like the energy that channels through you when you do this, right? Because I know you, and then I know like when you're creating content, without it being grounded, it just kind of like goes off into space, I'm sure. And also just, I'm sure, like I'm kind of looking at this scientifically, and I'm like, how else would it, like, sure it goes into people, but I think like something that you've talked to me about is like some of your frustrations is that energy doesn't get grounded or embodied or integrated in a group or in yourself or in our lives, and like that's what you're most really like energized for, is for what you're bringing through, for it to actually like move through and like create. And so like now we're co-creating, and whatever it is that you bring and that I bring, we're making something new. Anyways, so one of the things that we made to ground some of is this. This is the cover page. And so this is a book that goes to a course, and that course you can check it out at susquehannaalchemy.com, because this book goes with a series of audio lectures by you, a one-on-one session, and participating in one lunar cycle together as a group. And we haven't decided what we're going to cap the group at yet, but we probably will do it more than once. And so this is what we've been working on, as well as having a couple of failed video uploads. We've also been working on this course, creating this book, and creating the content and the structure to offer this online. And what we'd really love to do is offer it on ground. And so we've also been busy making connections, talking with people, kind of like building the rapport for true like community on ground co-creating the meta paradigm shift together. I think that's some important language, and like there's all these movements. So like there's the sovereignty movement. There's there's a bunch of like, I don't know where co-creation comes from. That might come from the sovereign movement.
Co-creation?
Yeah, like co-creativity is like a whole body of what is it? Like we're constantly co-creating our
Right.
reality. It might just come from some like consciousness movements.
I've always thought that is a term that's been linked to like New Agey stuff.
Sure.
Like
yeah.
Abraham Hicks and
yeah,
all of that, like
definitely.
and so like most, like everything which the words which we use, like everything is. We could go into any movement and we can deconstruct the movement and find a reason why like it's either false or bad or something like that.
But I like just borrowing the terms that sizzle down and marinate them, and like what's left from all these movements. Like what are the key things that feel and resonate for me? And so like elements of sovereignty.
Yes.
Elements of co-creation.
Right.
And then like even like meta paradigm shift is like, I'm like, all right, well, like what are just the elements that boil down that are important for human connection, human growth? You know, I just think of like myself and us and like any of the people that we touch as plants. Like, how do I care for a plant? Right? Anyways, I'm getting off topic a little bit. So we also have chapter 2 of A Story Waiting to Pierce You coming. Just doing some discussion of that for people who are plugged into that book. We have a fellowship of the board coming up again in April, which also corresponds with a tree nursery planting we're doing at the Bechtelsville farm. So we'll probably telegram that day to get people at least just involved. Familiar with, yeah. For people who are in the Susquehanna River, Pennsylvania greater area, the walks, the 40th parallel Rites walks, those are coming up in the spring, right? You're like, shit, we have all of this stuff on the table. Don't worry, that's why I'm here. I'm holding it together.
You know, all I want to do is like wake up and do nothing.
But then every time you do the things, you're so like energized and it's exciting.
It's
but
exciting.
There's a lot coming up. This is spring is like we're bursting forth, and so there's been quite a hibernation. But I think this housekeeping is to say like what have we been doing while we're hibernating? We've been creating a course. There's actually a second course. There's the walks coming. We already have in the pipeline this like collapsing false identities that you and I have been engaged with in our personal lives, and we're like looking forward to sharing that as content. But so the whole point, and I know you want to jump into A Story Waiting to Pierce You a little bit, but a lot of this today is kind of like pulling together and summarizing collapsing false timelines as it relates to meta paradigm shifting and how that has been manifesting in our lives. Because we've been doing a lot of collapsing false timeline walks in Philadelphia, at Jeckyl Island, and yeah, like what is all the ground, like how are we grounding this, and how can that be an example or an inspiration for how other people can ground this material in their lives. And so A Story that just went to black, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. A Story Waiting to Pierce You. And I know you mentioned something about Abaris right before we turned the record button on. So housekeeping is over. Housekeeping is over. I'm ready to jump in. Okay, hold on. That other thing will come as I'm sure this evolves. And because we're going to talk about Hostel in the Forest, right?
We're going to talk about it all.
Significant, movement there. Anyways.
All right.
Abaris.
So I want to, so this feels a lot like what you and I are doing, was it Plato or Socrates? One of those guys, they wrote in what was called the dialogues. And so they were able to express an idea through a conversation. And so there's so much in my mind, like this is the clearest, like interconnected ball in the world. Like, yeah, this is all connected. Can't you see that? But as I've talked more and more to people over the years, the more evident it's become. Like, no, it's not. Like, no. So by us having this conversation, it provides a dialogue in which I think, at least to me, as someone who's like telling a story, that I can bring continuity. And in my mind, all of these things, everything from the Susquehanna mystery to meta paradigm shift, to collapse of false timelines, to the traps. I'm like, it's all the same. I'm like, well, you're like, well, how do we stay on point? I'm like, it's never not been on point.
How do we weave and ground? Yeah, you're right.
So first off, is like all of it in my mind is it's all this, we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And so let's go back to a story waiting to pierce you.
Yes.
Where this began with the story waiting to pierce you a couple weeks ago is we planned on reading it and dissecting it, and then that turned into like, they're like, you can't do that.
No.
Why? Because that is culture. Culture's saying like, no, you can't do this idea because it is in violation of copyrights. I'm like, within the laws, like I'm not here to have problems with that.
Right.
But that did change that direction.
A little
So
bit.
I just want to go and point that out. But for me, why that story, that book had multi levels of why it was important to be shared.
Mm-hmm.
And on one of those levels was, I certainly, at least metaphorically, resonate with that character Abaris.
Mm-hmm.
And we told the story of the arrow.
Yeah.
So what Abaris in that story was about was a character who played a part in the collapse and rebirth of eras or civilizations.
Yeah.
Okay? So when we talk about meta-paradigm shift, in my mind, what we're talking about is the collapse. And what we're collapsing is that the collapse is already happening. The world pre-9/11 was a collapse, and pre-COVID was a collapse. We can see these changes. It's a controlled demolition. And all of this is being brought to a very, very well-defined endpoint, which is this blending of organic human material with like biological GMO computers, all of that. And I'm collapsing. Like the things we're doing is how do we get off? Like anyone who that resonates with, how do we get off that? How do we collapse that? And to that is we go into co-create something new. We don't know what we're co-creating because we're stepping outside of the paradigm. If we are within the paradigm, then we're using paradigm concepts to create it. So we're not outside the paradigm.
Right.
So we're going into the unknown. So we can't define what it is.
Yeah.
It is co-creative because our reality is a consensus reality. I can't create a reality. We create a reality together. And what we're doing is we're cutting off at the knees the falsities. And we're beginning by talking about time. And we're defining time by calendar systems, by all of these like things where we can poke holes and we're like, hey, that's not real. There's no Monday. We all, and being able to allow the visible stuff, and allowing that to collapse, because what happens is everything that's on top of it, which is all of culture, will come down. This is just consciousness.
Right.
And what that does is it creates the space for a major shift outside of what we've been taught. That's the meta paradigm shift. And it's the rewilding, allowing consciousness to just rewild. To start to think about things differently. And how do we do it? Is like we embrace the difference. And how are you and I embrace it? Is we're doing this. We're like, okay, we got like calendars. We're throwing all that away. And we're introducing new ideas which are ancient ideas. They're only new in terms of like to the modern world. And we are leaning into the world with this Abaris, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, just like Mike and Mike. And we are doing this, and we're doing this together. And what we're doing, you have been so beautiful into this introduction of like the journey which I've been on, and you've been on your journey. It was just a matter of time before our threads intertwined. Is like providing like a structure in a world where I was conflicted with, to bring in like, we're just like starting something which isn't ours, It's ours. And we're going into this wilderness path together, right?
Book dropping all over the place. Let me just say really quick though that I'm gonna make edits to what you just said.
What you do.
We can do it in solitude.
Yes.
I only make edits because I know what it's like, quote, out there, and I know from the work that I do, like immersing with people in themselves, that co-creation, meta-paradigm shift, the collapsing, it's not, there is an interdependence, and I heard you speaking to the interdependence. There's also it can also happen within oneself.
Yes.
I don't need you to do anything for me to collapse a false timeline, to collapse a false identity, to shift, to, what was the other word I wanted to use? I mean, it's so funny, like, we've been, like, reading, so we're reading Wilderness Path, which I won't go into, but it's a book that my great-aunt by marriage wrote, and it's about 10 years ago, and I just started rereading it to Naomi, and Michael overheard it and said, count me in, I'll be joining bedtime story time. And then also I've been reading a book to her called Inner Space, which is like a mindfulness, like metacognitive kids learning about thoughts and feelings book. And it's important that, like, for the health of each individual inner space, that I am not dependent upon what you do, and I am not dependent on what happens out there. And that's the beauty of the meta paradigm shift, is that you can remove yourself, step out of the paradigm, that's the meta, and shift and come back. So it's not even like you have to go off grid, which I have experience with. It's not even like you have to go homestead, which is what we're touching right now with being at the Bechtelsville farm. You don't have to go anywhere. It all can happen inside. It's all like a mental, energetic field.
Consciousness-driven reality.
Consciousness-driven.
Consciousness-driven reality. This is what we're talking about.
So I wanted to just make the distinction clear there between interdependence and codependence.
But, yes.
Because there's a lot of frustration and anger driven in our community.
And there's a lot of overlap there. There's a lot of overlap. But what you're saying, this is like what you're describing of the individual experience. Like, that's always been true. Any time in reality, that's always been true. There's always been the person, doesn't matter what culture you're in, they recognize they're in a false reality. Like, and they step out of it. Like, this is like, Walden's Woods and all of that. Like, I'm going away, like, the path that's taken. Like, that's always true. Where we are collectively now is special. Like, what COVID showed us, what COVID demonstrated, is that there's no sort of like, well, maybe not. Big technology, big pharma, big media, big government. They're in lockstep, and they're all bringing this. If we do not collectively, like, move off it.
You just said collectively. I just think about what you always say, like around kids. Be cool.
Just be cool.
Like when they get all worked up. Just be cool.
Just be cool.
So like. Yeah, be cool.
But now, so right now though, there's something special in this zeitgeist. Which is, and that is the importance. Like I got an email from someone who said the same thing as you. They're like, listen, like, just do your thing. This isn't a group thing. I'm like, that is, like, that's functional. Yes, and that's true. And you have to do your own stuff to the group thing, because this is still a consensus reality. And we are shifting. Like, if you, like, okay, you could go do that, and you could become the guy who moves out into the woods, and then there's no, like, the whole world becomes Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, or like what that was, like the image of it. There has to be a critical mass, or whatever it becomes, and this is what the rewilding of consciousness is, of people recognizing, like, okay, we're going to go into the wilderness collectively, because it's scary to do it individually. And I think that's part of, like, what our sharing of our trials and tribulations is like.
That's what this whole co-creative process is, like inviting the Telegram, like creating the Telegram group, just like building like more layers of intimacy, which you're saying has been possible
Right.
because you've been able to deconstruct your relationship of like Mike's face with the camera, and now it's you and me, and now it's you and me and the Telegram group. Now it's you and me and like the Fellowship of the Boards. Like we're just kind of like creating all these like concentric circles and spirals, and like that's the interdependence.
Right.
It's not, and no one is codependent on each other. We're just creating an interdependency of like, when I'm inspired, you're inspired, and then your inspiration inspires me, and like, or like, you're like pushing on, and like your pushing on encourages me to like push on with that new idea. But it's that,
Right.
and that, yes, that's like the beauty of interdependence.
As we're grounding in the deconstruction of falsicity. Is falsicity a word?
No.
That or false?
Falsicity?
Fixicity is a word.
Falsality.
False somethingity.
Okay.
And so, like, that's the rewilding, is the
Yeah.
bringing down, so that we don't just do that and then fold that. So,
Oh, is
so
this relating back to Abaris?
well, kind of. So it's like mostly like, so within the construct and control of reality
Mm-hmm.
is what's known as controlled opposition. So
Yeah.
like people are naturally going to rebel against their forced reality, and so controlled
Yeah.
opposition is to allow someone to push up against what they're, to rebel against something, but their rebellion ultimately folds back into the system.
Right.
So what's, by talking about
Controlled
time,
opposition.
time is like the
Yeah.
entire thing is built upon, like today is, what day is today? Do you even know? Saturday, Thursday?
Friday.
Friday. So like beginning to like
Wednesday.
to step outside of that and to even know what that is, to be able to go back in, like that's what is interesting to me with the community, is it's a group of people who are doing this kind of independently, not knowing where it's going, but recognizing that we're moving outside
Right.
because we don't want to just take all of this co-creation just to go and like
Recreate another.
like people tell me this all the time. They're like, well, the internet's great because it allows me to do this, this, and this. I'm like, you're freaking doing it in a system which was created by the military-industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
You're still in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't really want to see something new,
Mm-hmm.
like we live in the most malleable reality.
Mm-hmm.
We need to step outside there. That's what I'm interested in.
So you're using the thing that you just said, that you say to other people, but you're not using it to create that. I'm trying to just draw the lines of
Right.
distinguishment
Right.
here, so it's
Right.
really important, otherwise I think it does sound hypocritical. You are using the thing created by the military-industrial complex.
Mhm.
You're using that.
That's what this is.
That's what this is.
That's what the machine is. I'm pointing to the computer when I
Right.
point to that.
Yeah, you're using that, but you're not using that to create the meta-paradigm shift.
I'm using it to be like Abaris
Ah, good.
and bring it down. So there are two characters. God, this sounds so nuts. Like, I'm not saying this is me, but this is like, this idea has been introduced collectively in two movies done by Christopher Nolan. I think they're both done by Christopher Nolan.
Okay,
And one character's name is Bane, and the other one was the Joker.
okay.
Okay, they both came from this Dark Knight series, and the reason why I say that is because we're at my parents' house right now, right?
Yes.
You've seen pictures of me,
Yes.
like from before you knew me, right? Like
From before you knew you.
when I was born into this, like I was the most like born into the system,
Yeah.
I was like literally my job.
We're definitely going to share pictures and collapsing false identity
I don't even know how to do
episodes.
that.
Oh, we're totally
But
doing
like,
it.
so the characters from these movies were born into that system, and
Uh-huh.
then they like came,
Yeah, yeah.
like there's that.
They like rewild.
Yeah.
And you like if you do a side-by-side comparison, it's like this is Mike rewilded and this is Mike domesticated by the system.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important, I think, to share the before and
Yeah.
after pictures.
It's nuts, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I'd be curious. I mean, you've seen pictures of me from like high school, maybe,
Right.
and you know that I've had maybe relatively subjectively, one might call it an extreme rewilding,
Yeah.
like chosen. Like it was
Right.
chosen. And I wouldn't say I was like following any of like your content or material, but I was just intuitively moving in that direction.
Well, I think that all I'm doing is putting voice to something which is
a lot of people are experiencing.
That if someone resonates to like what I talk about, it's because they're hearing the same thing that I say. I just have to put a voice to it.
So come back to Abaris, and I think, were you going into dream walking with Abaris?
Well, yes and no. So Abaris being this idea of a purposeful, like there's a change, like and Abaris, particularly in that story, it talks about the role of the cons.
Yes.
And the end of one to another, and like it's not an exact parallel.
Yeah.
But that is an idea of like not necessarily going on the trajectory of the current paradigm. Of like, in fact, if anything, bringing down that.
Right, Genghis Khaning it, like totally, actually, militarily.
But done through like collapsing timelines, because as opposed to like how you're taught to think of like how you rebel against the system. That's the control.
But what's in Abaris is actually like demonstrating the rise and fall of civilizations.
Correct.
The collapsing by military force.
Yes.
Which is also, that's control opposition.
I would say so.
Right. So like the magic in Abaris, or the magic in a story waiting to pierce you, partly. Because I think there's a couple of key magic points.
Yes.
In a story waiting to pierce you. One of them is that there cannot be a controlled demolition.
Yes.
Of culture,
because
that has shown over and over and over again for multiple civilizations, like Rome, like high peak civilizations, they collapse, and then like another thing is creating, and what's creating? Kingdoms. The kingdoms, it's just this constant, like we're literally wasting our energy collectively, like macro collectively, wasting like the energy because we're just and so that hopefully, I think in chapter 2 maybe we'll get to like the key magical point number 2 of like what is the steady underlying energy that, and you see it in the micro example of Abaris, the steady underlying energy is this like inner stillness and this like breathing and this like walking as if like floating, right? Like it describes a lot about Abaris and his arrow and his person as a microcosm of this like macro possibility.
He was outside of the realm.
He was outside of the realm.
And the arrow carried him into the realm. He was in the realm with the arrow, but not of the realm to do his work. And his work was to walk in a circle around the land to purify.
Purify.
And purify, and they burn it down. That's what purification is.
You always get so destructive. Right, but not controlled demolition, not military opposite, whatever. Yes, there's something to the element of fire. But when you said purifiers, and it talks about like how the Mongolians, they were like a community of shamans. And then also there was like the Genghis Khan warriors, but they were warriors that, because they were so effective, because they moved as if like nothing moved them on the inside. They were unshakable. And that's why they were such solid warriors. And so we're not excited about the book being this like, oh, everyone become like shamanic like monks that can go out and like kill and destroy. That's not what we're talking about. It's the idea that there's a story in a story. There's a story in a story waiting to pierce you.
Yes, there is.
A deeper story that's like this like, I mean, I can't help but bring this lens because like this is a lot of my work, but immersing with self, immersing with another, and like finding the life force energy and the tantric weaving inside, like doing this like fire, violent, like transmuting that energy and mixing it with like the still and the calm and like the masculine and the feminine, and bringing that, and you're literally doing the work inside yourself. And as you do the work inside yourself, it's happening. It's just happening out there. And that's why I love the meta paradigm shift, because it talks about like, just pull away from it all. Just step out in whatever way you know how to. I mean, we do like a lot of ritual practices to ground this, but I think we mentioned at some point like journey work, like when you're in psychedelic realm, like that's you're stepping out. You're outside of the realm. And sometimes people can bring things through, like post-integration is really helpful. And that's the subtle, oh gosh, I'm like, now the river comes to mind. That's the steady current, the flow that sends us on our way, like in our lives, just with ease. Not easy, it's not easy. Like, God, we know this is not easy.
Right.
But like, we can develop a sense of ease and calm through all of the upheaval, the difficulty, the pain, the discomfort. But there doesn't need to be suffering, right? I'm like totally on my soapbox now of like inner energy work. So, but it's related to Abaris and a story.
It's related to the whole thing.
And the story in the story.
Well, so let's switch gears, because
yes,
in my mind there's no separation between like the stuff we're talking about theoretically and the life we're living like experientially. And
yes.
so,
okay,
so I think like that's
so our story.
So like what the last couple of weeks. So like let's begin with Philip.
Oh gosh.
And we won't go into detail. Let's just kind of like go into.
Right. Okay. So how are we manifesting, demonstrating, moving in this? How are we like? Okay. So.
3 weeks ago.
Maybe only 2 weeks ago.
I don't even know. I don't even know what it is.
Okay. So just like right before the end of what was the last name?
Oh, the last one, Wolf.
Right at the last phase of the lunation of the wolf moon. The last phase of that.
Right. The last strong.
The last strong. Right. We spent that time with Ras Ben. We spent one day in Philly doing the 9-mile walk to hell.
Yeah, the Lenape 9-mile walk to hell.
The Lenape 9-mile walk to hell. That I've done things like that before.
Okay.
And I just get like violently angry, and I want to like destroy shit, and I want to like knock over.
When you
things.
see things like that before, what do you mean?
Like I have visited places.
Okay.
Right, that have historical significance or that tell a story.
Cultural, historical significance. Mainstream.
Yeah.
Right, like statues.
Yeah, like the last time I went to
Right.
Jeckyl Island, and like the first thing, like when you pull in there, and I was excited for like the state park. It's this like crazy, oh my god, the hotels and the construction of like boutique strip malls and like the capitalistic driven, like all of this is about money.
Commoditized,
all of it. Anyways, I used to get really, really angry. And like I just wanted to like, ooh. Well, I don't want to say because we're
you
on
want to say you want to burn it down. You like literally like 5 minutes ago, like when I said burn it down, you looked at me with disdain. You're like, are you out of control? Like,
no,
why would you? And then 5 minutes later, like there's an actual confession, and you're like, I know those feelings.
I know, of course I know those feelings. Of course I know them, but I want to be clear that we're not promoting any of that behavior.
Of course not, because that's the controlled opposition.
That's the
go and
controlled
put that
opposition.
energy back into that system.
Right, which literally just destroys you. Anyways,
yes.
So I used to feel a lot of that, and what I'm trying to say is like, I was able to feel those feelings on the Lenape 9-mile walk to hell through Philadelphia.
As Ross told us, like
as
this
Ross
is this,
is
and
telling
explaining
us,
what everything
right,
was.
as he's bringing all of the history clear and home, and then I'm seeing these things, like these statues that are erected in like glory of sick behavior.
Mocking, gaslighting, that was the word I used.
Gaslighting, slavery, like the annihilation of like tribes and villages, and like this was all bore on your backs, and like we're gonna now erect statues, like where you're the perimeter, like we're honoring you, but like they're honoring their suffering.
You being the worker.
The worker, right? The worker, the immigrant, the
service, the slave,
all of them.
Spirit of enterprise.
Anyways, I'm like getting into the energy now.
It's kind of fun, right?
It's kind of fun, but I know that for my nervous system, it hurts afterwards.
All right.
And so I don't want to prolong or keep or maintain a nervous system position that's going to cause me suffering. Because now I'm perpetuating the narrative that I stepped into. Now I'm not collapsing the timeline. Now I'm internalizing the timeline, and I'm keeping it alive. I am perpetuating the falsity.
Am I getting yelled at?
Are you getting yelled at? No. Am I getting excited like
yes,
you do?
Yes, it's fun. Now you get it. Now you understand like the
Totally.
right.
Yes. Okay.
Like, and can you hold it? Can you be Abaris in that like
right.
and keep that like
and that's what I experienced on the 9 mile.
Right.
I was coming with a different level of consciousness, and also years of working with my own energy.
Right.
And I wanting to accept all feelings that come
right.
through, but then also wanting to ground them, embody, and bring a new story. And I think that's the whole purpose of Ras Ben, you and I, walking the 9 miles together, driving the 9
right.
miles and doing these touch points is because as we shift our field within the field,
mm-hmm.
where this narrative is on display,
yeah.
we are shifting the timeline.
Uh-huh.
We are changing the field
uh-huh.
as we change our fields.
Uh-huh.
We, the three of us, left an imprint.
Without a doubt.
All along the way.
All right. I don't know how. Like, I'm looking at the time because there's so much to talk about. So
yeah.
I want to. So 2 things I want to say to that. Like, this has been my experience,
yeah.
like witnessing this type of like my prior to meeting you. Like, I was much more focused on the external, on bringing the story, going
yeah.
to the collapse, whereas
yeah.
yours was much more focused on the internal.
Yeah.
Like, so like that's what you and I are bringing together.
Yeah.
Like, when we share this. So what Ross and I both do is we. Particularly with his analysis of public works of art as
yes.
as explanations as to what they're doing, what that does is it collapses a subliminal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true with like anytime when the unconscious and the conscious part of our minds are disconnected, there's a charge there. And so when that charge is connected, like it collapses, it loses its charge. Like when you know, like when someone's like, this is subliminal advertising, and look right here, it says like sex or fucking or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, and then you're like, oh, okay, like it takes away an internal charge.
You cracked the code.
You crack the code.
And it takes away the charge that's mind controlling you.
So that happens when we go and we take that, like there's nothing really to do per se,
no.
other than like witness it and maybe not being upset about it. Like kind
well,
of like
being upset about it and holding, being able to, like I always say, like carry all the feelings with
right.
you. And it's like being upset about it, but then however Abaris
right.
walked with his arrow,
right.
Like keeping that current gentle and slow and sending, he sent his arrow, which
right.
they say is like an embodiment of him moving forward.
Right.
When you send that forward and it's like clearing the path for you, it's
right.
almost like we were on the wilderness path with Ras Ben.
Right.
We were taking, a lot of the wilderness path book is talking about how the Lenape had to move as the German settlers and then like the Catholics came in and started occupying space.
Right.
They even talk about how, and this is so related to the 9 mile walk, William Penn, like he created peaceful relationships. Like he very much was an Abaris in many ways. And when he died and his sons and those who came after him, they totally, like they didn't carry that same energy. They carried a domination. This is mine. How can I cheat more land out of, how can I move these people out of the way? So the wilderness path and the 9 mile walk are totally like integrated in story. And go ahead.
All right, so a couple things. So
yes.
where I was, so
yes.
let me.
We have a lot of threads open.
Yeah, we've got a lot of threads open. So first off, because we haven't defined this, Wilderness Path is a historical fiction.
Thank you.
And it takes place in the 1740s, and it is about the settlers of the Pennsylvania wilderness and their interaction with the peoples that were living there, the Lenape, at that time. The key locations are still knowable in our modern world.
Yeah.
So one of the key locations is Germantown, which is a district of Philadelphia, which is literally where Ross lives. Which is literally where we began. And then the other parts are
where we
live in the Ole Valley, and it makes a lot of reference to the Susquehanna River and the Conestoga River, all of this. So like it touches and points which are just like unbelievable, like in a synchronistic lens, like we're watching it happen. Okay. I learned this reading the book, that the Lenape word for what they called William Penn was Mike which is literally the exact spelling which I've used for years, not knowing this, but like as a joke on Zoom, like a phonetic enunciation of Mike Wan. I spelled it Miquon. So like just stuff like that. So this is where I'm going to go with, like, this is like this is the dark weirdness where I'm going to go and sync back this story. So we go, we had this great day with Ras, and it was a long day. Like we went to all these places and we're walking, and like the end of the day, like I know that I was tired. I was ready to get home. Like it was a lot, like mentally, physically. Like I'm not used to being in cities anymore. Like emotion, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
We're ready to get out. We get back home, and when we finally get back home, I get a text the next day from Ras. And well, first he checks, like he checked to make certain we came home safely, which is like this very, which I've seen is a really nice quality, which I've always had with my interactions with Ras. But he said that he showed me that in Germantown, right after we dropped him off, you know, this is a sad truth of our modern world, like in our urban environments. Like there was a murder. There was a dude who was shot and killed in the streets of Germantown, which is a small section of Philadelphia, which is not typically plagued with like random murders like that. So it was like outside of the norm, and it was right at the same time. The time of the murder was when we dropped him off. Yeah. The point I'm trying to, where I want to like bring this back, is like there is a burp. There is a cultural burp that happens when we collapse. Like we went in there and this was Ras's work. Like there's one thing that happens when he's doing the work, and this is true for all of us, and he's figuring this out. But when he goes and he tells it to a receptive audience, that being me and you, we create like a different charge. Yeah. And then this is what the collapse looks like. So when we begin to see this, this is not the first time he and I have had like a conversation on dark material, which has resulted in there has been like something like, you know.
Where did the dark archetype come from? That was like, I feel like it was half an hour ago. You started talking about like a dark archetype.
I don't even remember.
And then we got into the 9 Mile Walk. I remember when is the end of the 9 Mile Walk is the Rodin Museum. Yeah. But before that, when we were at the Spirit of Empire, is that what it's called? Yeah. The Spirit of Empire. So we should say the 9 Mile Walk. Can we say like it's like do we have the beginning and end points? The Rodin Museum is the end
point, and the beginning is this marker, this 9 mile marker with a 40th parallel degree on the back of it, found in Chestnut Hill.
Yes, okay.
And it traces going down the river, whatever the parkway which traces the river to the art museum. Yes. So it's that. Okay. So and me and Ras are creating a video where we go into great detail with it.
You're going to do a podcast, and then he's also doing a video. So all along the way, there are these key monuments that mark a story. And if you're not paying attention, you wouldn't pick up on that story. But Ras has the story. Right. And I remember when we were at the Spirit of Empire, I remember when I pulled through the spirit and essence of the story and said it back to him, and like the energy that came through him was like, he's like, I would have never said it that way, but that's it. That's exactly it. He's like, that's what I've been trying to say all along. Yes. And it was this like, God, I mean, the Spirit of Empire, that was dead. That was like, you know, I don't like to use the word shaman because it's like overused, misused, blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to use it here. Like, that was the most shamanic point, I think, of the whole journey together. Yes. Because the magnitude of energy that passed through the three of us, that cleared through the space, it was visible and profound and like palpable. And it was all because that must have been the collapse point. I feel like if anything, that was like where it imploded. Right. And Ras was like, yes, now you see. Yes. Right? And now you feel it. And it had to do with the four directions. Mm-hmm. Like I was picking up, I was like, you're talking about like spirits of the directions and using, and it's not just about the story, it's about like, it's about bringing in like from the east and the west, and what the East and the West represented to
Yeah,
those
because that
people.
was in the monitor, or
Right.
the monument, excuse me.
Right, yes, and the way the monuments are facing,
Mhm.
the way their faces are set, and what they're looking forward towards, and
Mhm.
what they're looking at behind them.
Mhm.
I mean, and that's what I mean when I say, like, maybe 5-6 years ago,
Mhm.
I would have never had that profound experience because I was getting too angry.
Mhm.
And, like, the anger just blocked me from having oh my God, there's actually empowerment in this for me.
Mhm.
This is pointing back to my sovereignty and what I can do with my sovereignty and my power, my energy, my slow and steady, sometimes fast, my current, like my electrical current. I can do something with this that's going to return to my ancestors.
Your intrinsic currency.
My intrinsic currency. Oh, nicely done. My intrinsic currency, I can use it. And it influences my ancestors as I'm collapsing the timeline that has been set up in monument to perpetuate their suffering.
Mhm.
I can collapse that. I can collapse the present in myself
Mhm.
of, like, holding that narrative, and also change the energy for, I'm just going to use, like, a native paradigm, 7 generations from me, like, through Naomi and through the children that come, like, energetically in the belief system. Like, you can, I mean, like, we've played around with the Starboard, like, you're like so many generations ago, like, Johnny Wan and Mountain Mary got together and did Starboard to, like, set the date 7 generations ahead for you and I to meet, right, in our ancestral land, doing this type of work, which is very reflective of, like, almanac, biodynamic firmaments, right, like, worshiping the goddess of the sky, all these things. Gosh, I'm just taking on your energy. I feel like I'm like all over the place. So how about you ground it?
So, okay, we talked about this a few minutes ago as it related to, like, interdependence and codependence and the relationship between, like, the like, you know, you as an individual, and I keep going back to it, like, this is a time of consensus reality.
Yeah.
So the one point I want to make is, one, I agree with you completely. Like, I remember when you said something and I could see, like, the lights, like there was a shine in Ross's eye, like, that only happens when it's a shared experience. So he did his thing on his, like,
Interdependence.
the interdependence. So
That is a
that is
beautiful
an
picture.
example
Yes.
of that. And I agree with you. Like, that was probably the most significant part of our journey. So let's.
Intrinsic currency. Sorry.
I want to go in and loop this back to, like,
Okay.
so we did that. We'll probably go into, like,
We
a
did
little
that.
bit, like, we did that like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 4 strongs ago, whatever we want to say. So that occurred. We
Yeah.
did the Philadelphia, and then we kicked off for this trip where we are
Yeah.
right now in Florida.
Mhm.
And so Philadelphia was the beginning of a very important part of you know, this experience of, like, you know, what life has been for, like, let's say 7, 8 generations. Okay.
Yeah.
So we left. I don't remember what it was. We left our place in Bactosville, and we drove down to Georgia. We drove down to Georgia. So we went to Jeckyl Island. That was the first place we
We
went.
went to Jeckyl Island.
So
We
Jeckyl
took a
Island.
similar approach.
We took a similar approach. So yeah, so that's the link between this. So we did, there was a collapsing, if you will, and there was we had a tour guide. Like, we had a tour guide through Ras Ben, who brought us through this thing which happened in, like, let's date this, in the late 1600s, and, like, through like 1950, that's when, I believe, 1957 is when the Spirit of Enterprise was built.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so we've got that time period. We then brought that same approach of, whether we call it dream walking, which is really just an awareness of the mystery of life, and by bringing an awareness and seeing the story within the story of the life which you're living, that something else is happening, we brought that to Jeckyl Island.
Yes.
We were down at Jeckyl Island because we were.
There was 3 of us again.
There were 3 of us.
And you were the guide.
And now I guess now I was the guy.
Naomi,
Okay.
And
So we actually went down there because we were going to spend a couple days at Hostel in the Forest, and we did a Starboard and river ceremony down there. But before we went there, we went to Jeckyl Island. So I'm just kind of like laying the land as what Jeckyl Island is. So Jeckyl Island is one of 7 like barrier islands found on the southeast coast of Georgia.
Yeah.
Beautiful, and it's known, I think, as like the Golden Isle of Georgia. And Jeckyl Island, you had been there before. I'd never been there, but I know about it from a very specific conspiratorial, historical point of reference.
And I knew it as a state park.
And you knew it as a state park. Like I knew it as like, you know, as like, and so
birth of the Federal Reserve.
this is where not just like this is where like all of the characters came in the background, and they did their type in that. And they did their ceremony, if you will, to like create the foundation for what would become the Federal Reserve, which is the central banking system, which is the container in which culture is manipulated, occurs, and all the things that you're saying before.
Can you say a bit about the ceremony?
I mean,
just like the elements of what you mean when you say like that was where the ceremony occurred.
So
a
gathering in secret of like those in the know and plotting the future.
Okay.
I'm going to throw this into it, that there was a knowledge of the significance of that land. The current mindset, like, you know, I think this audience probably understands it, but the current collective mindset does not realize the correlation between the experience of life as a human being and the land in which we have it upon. Like, they're linked.
Right.
They're linked, like. And so
they were celebrating.
They were doing it on a very significant land. And the reason why I say that we know that is one of the main drivers of the ceremony were the Rockefellers.
Right.
So this is like J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, the Astors.
We're going to edit in some of those pictures we took.
All right. So we saw, like, walking around, like we talk about this a lot with Ras Ben, is like, you know, how mounds have either been desecrated or they've been repurposed.
Right.
And so the repurposing is to take back that power, to take back the connection of what the people who had an understanding of the relationship between life lived on land and the land itself. Yeah. And they used mound sites for a connection point. Yeah. The first Rockefeller Cottage, which is no cottage, it's a huge mansion.
They didn't take it back, they just took it.
They just took it, and it was called Indian Mound Cottage.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's why they know what they were doing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they do that on the land. This is no different than what they did in Philadelphia. Yeah. Knowing like what Philadelphia was, no different than what happened on the Susquehanna River, knowing what the Susquehanna River was.
So what was the best part?
Okay.
Of Jeckyl Island.
So we're driving up there, and like, you know, I'm excited because I know about that. Like, I'm excited because I like travel, and I like, because that's a human thing. To go somewhere new and it was going to be beautiful. And I had a point of reference to it, and dream walk, and blah, blah, and it was the beginning of our journey. And so we drive up to it. It was actually the second time, because we went to a different island the day before.
Right.
And that was a little bit of that had like some interesting flavor to it. So we go to the Jeckyl Island. We went to the other place first because they didn't charge us money to go there. And this one, they were charging us money.
Right.
And I had a little bee in my bonnet over, like, I don't think you charge me money, I'm not charging.
You're like, I don't want to give them $8.
Yeah, I was like, I was thinking it was $8 per person, it was $8 per island, so I felt better. So anyway, we're gonna go, like, whatever. We drive up to it, and there's not even a human interaction.
But wait, but like, ceremony. Like, we were resisting their invitation to participate in the ceremony because we didn't want to pay, like, I think of it as an offering, like a church, like ceremony. Right. Like, we didn't want to put our dollar in the basket because the basket represents the structure and the institution. Right. But it's also an invitation to participate. And once you're in the door and you're participating, now you're an insider. Now you can do the inside job. Yes. So we gave the offering. We put the money, like, we actually had physical Federal Reserve notes. Right. And we put the money in the machine. Like,
not even a human interaction. You put it in, and like the gate opens up. So okay, that's a modus operandi. Let's go back to the Catholic Church. Like, they have like the sticks and the offering baskets. And if someone doesn't have money, like not all churches, and definitely maybe not so much in the modern Catholic
Not in
world,
my church.
but in the Catholic Church, the universal church, that's what
Yeah.
Catholic means. Like we're going back like hundreds of years.
Yeah,
Like no, you're contributing.
Or in
This is
some
your
of the
tribute.
churches, everyone touches the plate,
Yes.
which is a different thing.
And but
altogether.
there is something beautiful about willfully
Yeah.
contributing.
Yeah.
But when you are forced.
Right,
So
right, right.
so I was having resistance. Like we've talked about this a little bit because
Yes.
I got a lot of fire, a lot
Right.
of resistance I got
Yes.
inside. When we drove up, I think to me this is what softened it immensely for me was like yours and Naomi's authentic glee to the flowers that were blooming on the side of the road,
Oh.
and then like the picking of the flowers
Yeah.
before. So okay, so
We like pulled over and
so
picked, yeah.
all right. So what happens? We go in, we give the money, we go in there, we go to like this beautiful beach. It was windy as can be.
Mhm.
It was like almost uncomfortably windy, but it was. I love going to beaches. I've been to a lot of beaches, particularly in the East Coast, and I know the different flavors
Mhm.
from like up north all the way down south. And so this had a very unique flavor.
Mhm.
The way the sand was, the way the wind was, how wide it was. But what was so unique to me,
Mhm.
and you knew this coming into it,
Yeah.
was the, what's the word, like the fancy word for there's like lots of it readily available. The,
Multitude?
okay, we'll use multitude, that's something.
Plentiful?
The plethora of sand dollars.
Yeah.
Like most beaches you go to, mid-Atlantic beaches, don't have sand dollars everywhere you turn around, and
Yeah.
there are sand dollars all around. And I start laughing inside. I'm like, motherfucker. We had to give we gave them these worthless Federal Reserve notes. Like we gave it back to the Federal Reserve. They
Yeah.
gave us these Federal Reserve notes. We gave them back, and then we got to leave with all of these sand dollars.
Authentic. And like your dad said last night, the sand dollars probably were authentic.
Currency.
The currency
Yeah.
for some manifestation of native people to that land.
Right, exactly. Like, okay, well, this holds a certain value, and I
Yeah.
know I can trade this
Yeah.
because of its, like, maybe for its uniqueness or its beauty
Yeah,
or
and
its,
maybe.
whatever it could be.
Right.
Like, at least conceptually, that makes sense. So, like,
Yeah.
that to me was a collapse.
So, just thinking about this through the dream walking lens,
Okay.
when we got there, the first thing first we found shelter because the wind was so strong. So first,
Right.
like the elements,
Right,
the air, the
right.
wind was
Right.
so intense. The heat, the hot, like there was
Right.
fire. The water, like the water was, it was just not a very inviting, like water, you know, like it was just, I mean, nowadays, like I just want like calm and clear.
Right.
And this was the opposite of that. Anyway, so the elements were such that they drove us to shelter, so we went behind a palm tree. Like as the wind was blowing this way, we went behind the palm tree. And so there's that, like the elements drove us to shelter. And the first thing Naomi did was she dug a hole,
Mhm.
and she's got in it, and she pulled a towel over herself, right?
Yeah.
And so like, just thinking about how how some people approach, like when the elements get intense, what shelter means, what shelter is for. We were right in the liminal space between giving our Federal Reserve notes, taking the invitation to be participants
Mhm.
of the system,
Mhm.
and then actually having the inside job where you and I went out and we're going out from the home and we're gonna go pioneer, like we're going across, like going into the wind, taking a walk across the beach. And I had been to Jeckyl Island before. I didn't know it as Jeckyl Island. I didn't know it as the birthplace of the Federal Reserve. I knew it as a state park with a beautiful beach. And my one key memory is like, I remember there were sand dollars. And so I knew in my mind, I was like, we're gonna go out there, and I was like, there's a chance that we're gonna find a plethora of sand dollars. And so like Naomi's just like hunkered down at home, like in the hole, like hiding herself from the elements. And maybe that's appropriate for a child, right? Or for the mentality of like, this is too much for me.
Right.
But you and I went out because I had a premonition, if you will, of there's redemption here.
Mhm.
I hadn't made the link that you made of like Federal Reserve notes for sand dollars, but I was like, there's like a redemption storyline here. And when we went out and found those sand dollars, it spoke to the rewilding. Like, we rewilded our currency. Like, talking about, like, how did we collapse the false timeline at Jeckyl Island? Part of it was us rewilding our currency, giving up our Federal Reserve notes for sand dollars. And, like, little do they know, because they're not a part of the inside job, whoever they is, like the institution, once we were on the inside, it didn't matter, like this, like breaking down the codependence, it didn't matter that we were within their realm. We still in our dream walk had this like path where we collected sand dollars, and we collected enough for like the directions on the starboard, even enough for maybe like as a reflection of the planets, and linking like the ocean and the sand dollars with the planets and the heavens above, and you know, had this like mystical experience of finding true riches, like wild, like nature, like how much more valuable is this? And they're all over the place. And like the institution or those who would operate in it would maybe like, oh, that's special, or that's neat, or look, they're so pretty. But the collapsing of the timeline, or the shedding of the falsity for us was the deeper mystical spiritual story that was being told, and like that's totally looked over. Like no one would ever be like, oh, like haha, gotcha, like I gave you dollars but I got sand dollars. Like no one is like, gotcha.
I think it's the most obvious thing in the world.
I know, but for us, like, because we're carrying a story within a story,
right,
and we're doing that story within a story within a story within a story to just like the whole thing.
Right.
And just be like, what's like, we just rewilded our consciousness.
Right.
We stepped out of the enslavement to the Federal Reserve system.
Right.
I mean, like we do that in lots of ways.
Right.
But we did that in a mystical dream walk story at Jeckyl Island.
All right. So how are we on time? We're at 1 o'clock, so we're okay.
Yeah.
So there are a couple things like the kicker to that. So how Jeckyl Island set up, like part of it's like this natural park, like hasn't been touched. Like there's, and then there's parts of it which have been very like more modern touch. Like there's like like whatever, like a modern like mid-tier hotel, and mid-tier shops, and then there's still like elements to the Gilded Age, like the Rockefeller Age. And so we went to that, and that's a historical district. And we went there. We're like, and they incorporated also
with
all.
Our sand dollars.
They also incorporated all with the endangered species, like turtle sort of stuff. So this is part of the gaslighting and mocking, which we saw with the Spirit of Enterprise. They're like, all of the visitors that go there, there's also like, let me remind you how you're responsible for destroying the whole thing is just like, but that's how like the sickness of like the whole thing is like, I come here and like the people who come to a state park like that, one which is less boardwalky and more natural, they're going to have an environmental touch, the majority of them, the mainstream. And if you have a more environmental touch in your heart in the modern world, you also probably carry a guilt that's been forced upon you that you're the responsibility for the destruction of the
sea turtles.
Right, because regardless. So we go there, and then to the Sea Turtle Museum, and then we go to the Museum of
the Sea Turtle Rescue Center, and then we went to the Museum of Jeckyl Island.
And that's where we saw all this stuff. It was kind of fun. Like, of course they're going to do well because they got Rockefeller money and all of this, and it's like, it is
hokey.
It was hokey. I still thought it was done well, but it had very similar, not in detail, but in consciousness behind it, to the Spirit of Enterprise. The Spirit of Enterprise is supposedly its position, like this is from the gilded class of Philadelphia. This is a gift to all of the working class people that built our country. Thank you, laborers. Thank you, this, for making this.
Right.
Like, we didn't do anything except for like live off of your back, and now we're giving you this like monument. Like, that's basically what this was. Like, we built the Federal Reserve to put you in debt before you were even born, and we're giving you this like wonderful, now you can come to where we once lived and you can buy trinkets.
You can't.
So anyway, so we go in there, like I still enjoy going into these sort of things. Like, I have fun with that. So we go through that, and then we're going to go to, we hadn't checked in yet, to the Hostel at Forrest.
Oh, right.
And like by this time, like we're kind of tired, we're ready to check in, we got all this sort of thing. And we've got this car, we're taking your car. You've got like it's sweet how, we'll show your car sometimes. It's like, it's unusual, it's uncommon.
Okay.
But part of it is like, it's so freaking jam-packed with stuff, because we're on the road for 2 weeks for like a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And everything we have is in this car, and it's a Prius, you drive a Prius,
Yeah,
right?
an electric hybrid.
An electric hybrid, and this is new to me, I don't do that.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not certain how all of that stuff works. And we come back to the car, and I believe I drove it into
Yeah.
that parking lot, and we go and the car is locked, and all the keys are locked in the car. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't understand how any of this works. Like, how come the keys are locked in the
And
car?
I didn't know that was possible
We
because generally with this like electrical like type of vehicle, it won't allow you to lock the key in the car. It'll sense the key in the car and it won't lock.
And I'm thinking like it's like with the computer stuff, like everything, like,
Yes.
like, and this is part of this like relationship of being in the world and not of
Right,
the
right.
world, and like finding, this is me still learning
Yeah.
how to navigate with what I want to do in this world at this time.
Yeah.
It's like how not. So anyway, so I'm sitting here, I'm looking at this. This is what's going on in my mind. I'm like, I just want to go and check into go to Hostel in Forrest. And I know we can figure this out, but I'm like, this is like a bump, and I'm like, how are we gonna, like all of these kind of like fixing sort of like ideas, and like I'm like trying to like find this calm, and you're like, yeah, this shouldn't happen. Something strange is occurring because the keys are in there, and just like what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then we go over to Naomi's door, and it's unlocked, and the only reason it was unlocked
Yes.
was because like when the machine locked itself, like she didn't get out of the car,
Right.
and she was like, so she was doing something with money.
Right. So that as you're telling the story, like I've been saying how funny it is all along, but this is just taking it to a deeper level. We have been modeling, tracking, like old school checkbook.
Right.
Right. Like we were modeling that, and she heard us and she caught on to that. And so she was like, oh, she's like, my grandparents gave me like this, like.
She had $40.
My grandparents gave me $40. I had $5 left over from Christmas money. So she started creating her own little like checkbook with like a balance and a ledger. She just likes to create like structures and like draw. And so this is very much like, oh, she's like, I understand this, I can create this. And so she didn't get out of the car when we got to the Jeckyl Island Museum, because she was learning and integrating and embodying for herself, like, how am I going to track my little $45 of Federal Reserve notes? How am I going to account for them?
Right.
And because she was doing that, and I was like, come on, Naomi, get out of the car. Like, I had to go around and I had to open her door, which means she had to unlock her door. And that's the only reason why we weren't locked out, because I have no idea. Like, I don't even.
That's the only reason. So
Yes.
so from the innocence and purity of a child, and then here's the other thing which is really interesting. Like if you actually like are interested in like monetary policy and all that sort of stuff, like people who are interested in that, not realizing like it's just a controlled demolition, bring everyone to like cryptocurrency. It's the fact that the Federal Reserve or the Treasury has lost the discipline of balancing the checkbook. They're just printing money, printing money. So like this child,
Just
yeah,
like
it's
nature.
a system. It's still a system, but like bringing a structure into it. So like there were like all of these levels, and it was from that we like got back in the car and
Bump averted.
Bump averted.
So yeah, they just are printing that's how the sand dollars, the sand dollars, like they just keep being made and they just keep washing up on shore.
Right.
Like,
and no one knows how.
There's no checks and balances.
Right.
Like it's just like it just keeps.
Which would make sense why the Federal Reserve is just following like what it should be, but we just have a system based when we begin to look at the magic, spell work of like how actual reality is inverted into control. That's the false reality. Like it's.
I'm gonna have to sit with that one. It's like the land and the ocean are like, you thought you were using our magic to make your structures.
Right.
Gotcha. Like now we see over time, the structure has actually copied much more of like how nature acts with the
Yes.
sand dollars.
Yes.
And wow.
So that's literally how you mentioned earlier, like Rome to kingdoms to like British Empire. It's the same class.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the
yeah,
same
just like shifting.
and because they allow, it's only temporary because it's out of balance, it's eventually going to collapse, and as long as I go and I create the new one before the next one collapses, well then I stay ahead of the curve.
And
Those are the
that's how
tribalites.
and that's how nature is. That's totally nature, like rises and falls, it collapses, a tree grows and it falls and it like decomposes and it provides nourishment,
Yes.
right? And then it grows back up and we don't think once about like, oh, that great civilization and then it fell. It's just like it was a tree and it decomposed.
Right.
So I think this is part of the second magical point in a story waiting to pierce you is that like it's not about, because we had this conversation a long time ago about like hijacking
Okay.
and reseeding.
Okay.
Like reseeding like tide and also reseeding like
Right.
RESEEDING.
Right.
How throughout history a lot of like mystical mythology story is that like the star people have to reseed the earth every so often, like to get more light because
Right.
it gets really dark and there needs to be a reseeding of light and sometimes it gets hijacked, like with Guinevere.
Mhm.
Guinevere was Queen of the Fae and King Arthur, and this was like the human world and the Fae like coming together to reseed, like through their union, through their
Mhm.
sacred marriage, there would be a reseeding of light and dark, a weaving of the worlds, the underworld and the human world, blah, blah, blah. But it was like hijacked, like there was like, you know, the Lancelot kind of like hijacking. There's a hijacking story in the Magdalene Essene community where it was like the reseeding of light was the crucifixion drama. That was a reseeding of light. But then Rome was a hijack and it pushed the community away and out and into the wilderness and they dispersed. And the light was dispersed. And that comes around to being always like it works out. Like there's always a balance. Like there's no hijack or a reseeding catastrophe that you know hijacked that doesn't end up coming around to just balance out. And that's because I was like, what do we do to like sidestep the hijack? Like how can we stop having these repetitive narratives of rise and fall, of reseed hijack? And you're like, that's nature. That's just how it is. The only thing that's missing is how we carry ourselves through it, right?
Right.
I mean, that seems to me to be the bottom line, and like one of the magic take homes of a story waiting to pierce you is like, how do we carry ourselves through that hijacking, the reseeding, the collapsing, the rise and fall of civilization? Like, just look at what nature does, and look at how nature is actually behind and underneath nature.
Mhm.
I'm using that very like loosely. How is it the magic of the elements guiding and orchestrating all of this? And like, don't worry, like let it go. There's no separation. These things are being impacted by the elements just as much as like you and I are being impacted by them.
Mhm.
Like there is a greater orchestration
Yes.
here.
Yes. So the false reality is like the medium in between. So like there
The
was one.
medium in between is the
that-
false reality.
Right, and so there's been times where people lived in harmony with what you're describing, and that's kind of like the difference between permaculture and agriculture. Like permaculture principles being, how do I still have a bit of a manipulation of the natural world, but in a way which goes with it.
Mhm.
You know, how I work with the system versus agriculture.
Mhm.
How so that's an approach, and that's what I think what rewilding consciousness is like. Those of us, which is probably all of us, that
Yeah.
have been born into the system,
Into
which
the medium.
into the medium. That's the system, the false reality. So that's what we think is real.
There's so much there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then how do we carry ourselves outside of it?
Yeah.
Like recognizing, like, okay, there's going to be this and this and this, and I don't want to go in that anymore.
Right. And the medium
Okay,
often is the channeler, the guru.
the medium.
And so like I don't know where I've read this, there's a nice succinct quote and I'm not going to be able to get it, but I'm going to describe it. We are are entering into a time where the lone guru isn't relevant anymore.
Right.
Where that is like a major part of the zeitgeist collapse, is that the medium, like we're not dependent on the medium.
Right.
We don't need a channeler. We are the channel.
Yeah.
That's what what TVs have shown us. Like
Right.
they are put in front of us to program us
Right.
and provide channels because they're just a reflection of us.
Right.
We are the program.
Right.
We are the channel.
Right.
We are the medium. We don't
Right.
need to go to a medium.
Right.
We don't need a guru. We
Right.
don't need a television to program us. Like we are it.
In fact,
All of it
that
right
is
here.
exactly what we want to avoid, the programming television,
Exactly.
all of that sort of stuff.
And it's just, like we're moving about how do we embody that? How do we ground this idea
Mhm.
in our bodies as we're walking around like Abaris did?
Right.
Like literally walking around,
Mhm.
exploring, traveling, doing on ground work, like kind of, I don't think that this eliminates the role of guides and
Mhm.
facilitators.
Right.
But it's definitely collapsing the hierarchy of like the guru at the top and the masses.
Right.
Now it's more like there's circles, right?
Mhm.
And like the further out you've gone, now you can like come back to the center and be like, guys, it's not crazy out there.
Right.
You're not gonna get hurt. Like walk with me.
Mm-hmm.
And like vice versa, like people from the center can be like, yo, like you're going a little too far. Let me just pull you back in, feed you, nourish you, ground you, and you can go back out. Like just, so we have a time constraint. I also feel like a pause would be good.
Yeah,
because
this
there's
is-
a part 2 to this. We haven't even gotten to Hostel in the Forest.
We have, okay, so let's pause with that.
And Hostel in the Forest, the teaser for Collapsing Falls Timelines in the Meta Paradigm Shift show is so in the Telegram group specifically, and the original video that recorded images but not audio, we birthed a River and Stars ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't get recorded. And I was just like, you were like, I'm gonna bring the river to this fellowship of the boards. And then we talked about that, and it didn't get caught. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't captured.
Right. We didn't have the feedback loop, like what?
We didn't have the feedback loop, but there were a few people who were like, oh man, like I'm sad to have missed that. And I was like, we'll do it again. And we also practiced it on ground at Hostel in the Forest. And there was like another kind of like feedback loop that was very interesting, right?
Right.
And so I'm just realizing though how like as we're collapsing this false timeline, that the elements that we work with, the stars, the river, the land, is kind of showing itself to us in our faces and being like, there's I would say Hostel in the Forest, like this is just the teaser for part 2 of this, is Hostel in the Forest is where the power of the river and stars ceremony was like,
Well,
the birth started, the delivery happened. Like,
so hostil's a double entendre, like someone who's hostile, like out of like.
yes.
Like and
Hostile.
Hostile.
Yes.
And like hostile meaning like hospitable, like
Yeah.
so we've got those, and we heard a noise that night, which no one
Yes.
had. The people
Don't
who lived
give any
there,
more
right?
away.
So
Don't
so
give
they
any
said,
more
okay,
away.
so all right, let's wrap up
Yes.
a little bit right now. I'm going to turn the screen back on
Okay.
because it's nice to look. But what I wanted to say was this about you were talking. The one last thing.
You're running out of disk space.
That's okay. It just says that.
Okay.
It hears us in it.
Okay.
When we're talking about like the false reality, the culture, the nature, the this, the change, and all of that.
Yeah.
And to me, this is also very much part of what, and this is going to be out there. I don't know how often you and I have talked about this. I know you've heard me say this before, but the human being
Mm-hmm.
is changing.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go back. The human being from your great-grandparents is not the human being nowadays. It's a literal truth. Like that's
Yeah.
from GMOs, that's from vaccines. It goes
Right.
DNA impacts, and then structure of consciousness through like technology and all this. There's something new that's being created.
Yeah.
Like it's either going to become the transhuman human. Like that's one of the directions which is being sold and told.
Oh, right.
But it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be. And like
Yes,
as
yes.
we begin to turn,
Right.
like when I say we, I mean like consensus,
Yeah.
this is when like we don't go back to being Neanderthal. We become whatever.
We keep evolving in our natural state.
From the experiences we've had, like
Yeah.
our consciousness is different than it's ever been before, because the one thing which we have learned from all of the touch screens for all of the young children who are born into it is they have an interconnection with reality, information, and stuff which no generation before has ever had.
Which means they can touch.
They have neural pathways in their brains that are connected that none of us ever did. It's on a different dimension.
Yes. And
if
so
they are not putting that onto the cloud, but they are putting that in somewhere else, I don't know what it's going to be, but the malleability of our baseline reality tells me that this is what we're talking about, meta paradigm shift. I'm talking that level.
Yeah. When and we learned from the college students that we did a class for not too long ago that they're really into like this back to nature kind of movement. And so I just, when you were talking about that, I was thinking like the way that they touch, the way that they've been conditioned by the touch screen, like programming, like what does that, when they rewild, I think about my own like seeing energy on plants and like and unified sense, my own journey. I was just like, if I had the conditioning of the touch screen and I rewild it and I started interacting like with the real palpable currency of life force and nature in myself, like it translates so well. Like it's almost like there's a dark story where it's like they're the touch screen generation is just being like conditioned to become the computer, become the robot themselves. But then there's also like I don't like
what happens when they turn right?
Right. I don't like to use the light and dark here because like.
But there is a fork in the road.
Sure, and so the weaving together of the light and the dark here are the narratives, right? The hopeful, the hope in this is also that like, yes, if they take if they go back to nature with this conditioning, like how much more ready they'll be to touch and feel the currency of life.
And they will experience it in a way we can't imagine because our baseline neural pathways were not created that way.
Right, exactly.
That, when we have an entire generation, if that generation does not fall back into the system, but goes back to the baseline, which is what the rewilding is, what will that be? That's rhetorical.
Yeah.
And that's what we're and that has to be consensus. It could be.
Could be.
It could be. That's what I think we are doing collectively. Otherwise, it's Virginia Dare, like the one lone child in the wilderness.
Right. Oh wow. Okay.
All right.
We have
so
to
let's
put a
go.
pause on it so we can keep going. We have talked about rewilding consciousness a lot today. Michael has a whole 4 videos, 4 or 5 videos of rewilding consciousness. A few months ago, I started archiving and connecting Subscribestar to the archive. And so some of the history of YouTube content is not all out there on YouTube anymore. Some of it is now on Subscribestar. Subscribestar has like different levels, and the rewilding consciousness you can give at any of the tiered levels, and the rewilding consciousness videos are in all of the tiers. So we appreciate like whatever level you desire or choose to give at for however long. But we are taking some of your content and archiving it because we're finding the value in it as it is a building mechanism for this whole process and journey. And we just want to have it captured in a place where there can be an energy exchange on the value. I mean, all your content is valuable, but there are some key things that you put a lot of intention in. They're building blocks. Hijacking reality series. There's a lot there. So if you want to go back and check out the Rewilding Consciousness, which is like a huge foundation and blanket that we've been working with today that you go deep on in multiple videos, you can go to Subscribestar. Is it Susquehanna Alchemy or Michael Wan?
Susquehanna Alchemy. We'll have a link for this.
Okay, we'll put the Subscribestar link to the Rewilding Consciousness content in this, in the description.
Right.
Okay. So part 2 is coming. We still have the rest of our journey to share.
Right.
And more to come. We're doing a lot of development behind the scenes.
Yeah. So, and I mean, the Subscribe Star is one of the ways, I mean, to be in this world and not of this world is like, how do you deal with money? And so
Right.
like we're gonna do this no matter what, but we still, this is what we do. So if you wanna support this, we're gonna still put this stuff out. Subscribe Star is a nice way, like have a session with us. Like, you get a flavor of like how and what we bring.
Yeah.
And applying this analysis on someone and their life, the rights of the 40th parallel, like all of those sort of things. Like it's very beneficial in the most practical levels for just life in general. So that is greatly appreciated. And then lastly, the timing of this. If anyone is in the Pennsylvania area or like where we are, like south of Allentown, north of Philadelphia, and want to be part of the tree planting.
Yeah.
Like, just
That's
send
a
an
thing.
email and ask us, and because we're gonna have a day where we're doing that, that's gonna be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Building community.
There we go.
Yeah. And the how to collapse false timelines to make space for meta paradigm shift, that course is also available. And that's another way, we're gonna, like you said, continue to make this content,
Right.
but we're also developing deeper, detailed, time-intensive content,
Right.
in which there can be an energy exchange and a tighter circle, a depth of concentricity
Right.
to the engagement, and so you can find that on the SusquehannaAlchemy.com boutique store.
Boutique. That's right.
It's an online boutique.
It's an online
It's
boutique.
an online store platform. I don't know. I get all my language mixed up.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching.
Till next time.
Till, a couple hours from now for us.